we'll need a minute.
Parshanut. It's gone from the man. You want one? Thank you very much. I'll take something there.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, thank you.
Still open? Vabbè, bellissime. Le emozioni, lo Uve.
Io c'è cos'è, non c'è cos'è lo so.
ישו?
יש משהו מהפה.
מילה.
April, tell your friends about what we've got going here. It's terrific. It's not known properly. It's experimental. It's great. You can see we're doing things differently. Tell your friends. Keep them working. Yes, agreed. Yeah.
¿De lo mismo?
So maybe if you don't need it, you're going two, maybe you need HDMI1.
זה על אחד. אולי אני אעביר את זה לשתיים? רוצה להעביר את זה לשתיים, אני אציג.
Yeah, exactly. Use this thing.
Okay.
Okay, Todd. Okay, today we usually say Chacham Adib Minavi. So the last few weeks I've been trying to pretend to be a little bit of a Chacham. Today I'm going to try to pretend to be a little bit of a Navi. Today's topic is what is the future of Parshanut? What's in store for us, and most importantly, how we can participate in the future of Parshanut. And we means every single one of us. There's all sorts of ways that anyone who has some time can help and make a contribution from which all of Klal Yisrael can benefit. So that's our topic for today. It sounds like a tall order, but the truth is it's very simple thing to accomplish. So first of all, in order to get to the future, so just a recap so that we can build on it, because one of the most important things that we've seen over the last few weeks is that Parshanut and basically any discipline builds on its people build on their predecessors. And sometimes we see it explicitly, sometimes people are very open and obvious about their sources, and sometimes it's only implicit, and we have to dig down and excavate in order to see what was influencing, what the influences were on different Parshanim. We saw this in the Parshanut of Ramban, And that's perhaps one of the best examples in all of Parshanut, where if one would read Ramban's Perush al Torah, one would think that Ramban is creating Yesh Me'ayin. And we saw that there's a very, very significant layer of Ramban that is influenced by Radak, another layer that's influenced by Balei Tosafot, and Ramban is really combining all sorts of different cultures, and that's what makes Ramban's Parshanut so rich and what allowed him to make the advance that he did. We saw this again in Sforno, in which Sforno is basically a combination of many ideas, many is an understatement, all sorts of ideas from both Rambam and Ramban. And finally, last week, when we looked at the Parshanut of Shadal, we saw that here for the first time, since we're talking about a 19th century Parshan, where the standards of citation have already changed. They're already much closer, pretty much what they are today. And Shadal was a very, very intellectually honest person. And so there we saw almost an extreme case where Shadal is even citing his students, always trying to give credit to all of the sources before him. And that's part of what allowed Shadal to make his advances. It's true that sometimes there are people who make quantum leaps and are able to have a very, very creative idea, which has a massive impact. But most of the time in the world, fields develop, everyone is building on what came before them, or at least when there's good solid work, it's being done based on what everything that came before. Just to take another simple example, so we talked about so the most famous Parshan ever is Rashi, and if we would remove everything from Rashi that was taken from earlier sources, we wouldn't have all that much left. And so the layer, that's not to say that Rashi wasn't a very creative person, that's not to say that Rashi didn't add all sorts of nuances, but Rashi couldn't have done what he did without all the raw materials that he was using. And that's the way we all work, or any smart person works. And because to not pay attention to everything that came before us is a sign probably of arrogance and a big waste. Why reinvent the wheel? The corollary that Parshanut always builds on its predecessors, or knowledge builds on its predecessors, is that access is critical. Access to earlier sources is what will make a tremendous difference and what will determine whether a person is able to take things to the next level. And we saw examples of this, very strong examples, because when nowadays we have access to lots of different ways, but when we have access to some of the earlier versions of different works, when we have access to manuscripts, so then we were able to see that, for example, in the case of Ramban, that when Ramban came to Eretz Yisrael and suddenly had access to all sorts of material, to Perushim of Rabbeinu Hananel, to Perushim of Rabbi Yosef Korshor that he probably didn't have access to in Spain, he added a whole significant layer to his Perush. And in some cases, he changed and revised and crossed out earlier parts of his Perush. That was an example in Ramban. In the case of Shadal, we saw this as well. And we saw that when we looked briefly at a couple of the manuscripts, we saw that when Shadal, in his later stages of his life, when he got access to more Rashi manuscripts, suddenly he started doing a lot of work on Nuschaot in Rashi and textual and the different textual versions of Rashi, paying much closer attention to the text, to the wording in Rashi, and I'd like to take, as a segue into what we're going to look at today, I'd like to take a look. We saw last week the earlier work of Shadal. We said that Shadal's Perush al Torah wasn't published in his lifetime, and it was only published by his sons, his surviving sons, after he died. But there was an earlier work of Shadal on Torah, which is much smaller than the Perush al Torah that we're familiar with, called Hamish Shadel. And I brought in my copy of Hamish Shadel, show and tell. And it was published in 1847. Now, that's an important date. So keep in mind, we're going to come. It's like in Shakespeare when he puts the dagger or whatever, and we just know that it's going to come up later. So 1847. So Shadal, in 1847, he published this work. So hope we get it back. Okay. He published the work called Hamishtadel. And in the Midbar Parakat, Pasuk Aleph, he gives us a good example of where access to works, availability of works makes a big difference. And if we use my there we go. Okay, yeah, everyone want to see the red? I can make it a little. Is it big enough for everyone to make out the words? A little bigger. Okay. It's up to. Yeah, this can be good, but it's gonna be okay. So we'll stay fine. Let's start here. The attack Parshanut, so not tak reish vav. Quick calculation. Tak reish vav is what year? 1846. Tak reish vav at 240. So 1846. Zachiti v'kaniti sefer harechasim levikach umatzati ki המחבר התעורר על הצמיחה הזאת והתקומם נגד סברת הקדמונים. Now, the exact details of what he's talking about here is not that relevant for us right now. In 1846, Shadal gets a copy of a work called Harechasim Leviga. What's Harechasim Leviga? Harechasim Leviga was published 31 years earlier in 1815 by Rabbi Yehuda Leib Shapira, Rabbi Yehuda Frankfurter. And it was a German Parshan, and Harechasim Leviga, for 31 years, Shadal didn't have a copy, even though Shadal was in Italy, so it wasn't all that far from Germany. But shipping Svarim, when they were published, it wasn't exactly like it is like ordering on Amazon or ordering on Svarim.org.il or whatever, wherever one orders Svarim from online today. And it was only in 1846 where he got a copy of this Perush. And the whole next page is Hinani sorry, let's take it back. Lefichach, V'yot, Sefer Harechasim Leviga. Vilti mefursam ba'olam. Hinani ma'atik devarav, l'man yuchlu chachamim, to analyze the Perush. And Shadal then, in his Mishnadel, which is, I don't know, maybe 100 pages, the whole work, it's like a page-long citation of this book, Harechasim Leviga. So you can see how excited Shadal, who obviously had all sorts of things to talk about in his Perush, how excited he was that he's going to spend a page just copying over what this book, what this Perush Harechasim Leviga had to say. And this Perush Harechasim Leviga is a great example. Because Harechasim Leviga not only remained unknown until 1846, when Shadal copied over a page of it, but it continued to remain unknown for another 177 years, until a couple months ago. So Harechasim Leviga is what time? What I could check the logs, but Harechasim Leviga. So the truth is, it was actually, and I'll be maskir somebody who made a major contribution before the age of the internet. His name was Rabbi Yehuda Leibovitz, and Rabbi Yehuda Leibovitz lived in Beit Vagan, and unfortunately, he and his wife didn't have any children. And as he got a little older in his life, he decided that he wanted to. There were all these svarim that people didn't have, that were out of print. People didn't have access to. It was svarim that were in print, but bnei yeshivot couldn't always afford. So he decided he was going to publish a whole big library of svarim at below cost for bnei yeshivot. I think at cost for everyone else. And one of the works that he republished was this Perush Harechasim Leviga, and it hadn't been in print for who knows how long before that. But the truth is, how many people bought Harechasim Leviga even back 30 years ago when it was republished? A very small number. Harechasim Leviga is now available in in the Mikrot Gedolot, in the online Mikrot Gedolot, and it's actually about 95% finished. Still another 5%. And one of the people who's volunteering for Ala Torah is working on an annotated edition of Harei Chasim Levigai. So when we talk about the ability to redeem Perushim that have been out of print forever, that most people don't have copies of, that you have to go to a fancy library to find a copy of. So our generation has incredible access. Just in the last few years, even things have changed that have never been possible to do before. Suddenly we can do them with relative ease. And that's one of the directions in which Parshanut HaMikra is going. Some of this has already happened, but like I said, there's things that even in the last couple months and even in the last couple weeks since we started this series, we're going to see an example of a new Perush that is suddenly available that nobody had access to. Part of it remains, it was in manuscript for over 200 years until a couple of years ago, and now it's available with a click of a button. So we're going to take an example now, just to understand, to appreciate what Harei Chasim Levigai is doing, why it's such a great Perush, and why it's so important to redeem some of these Perushim that are relatively unknown and inaccessible. So we're going to turn to the Mikrot Gedolot, and we'll go to the end of last week's parasha, Vayikra Perek Kaf Zayin. Okay, so book button, Vayikra Kaf Zayin. And on the side column, there is a list of psukim, easy navigation. So whether if you're in dual pane mode, top there, dual pane mode, full mode, single mode. Right, these are important buttons everyone needs to know. Right, this is my last shiur here. So the 3 buttons that allow you to switch between modes. This will give the full Mikrot Gedolot mode. You click on Yud here. You'll go to Pasuk Yud, and you'll have the various Parshanim that comment on Pasuk Yud, but these aren't all the Parshanim that comment on Pasuk Yud. These are just the Parshanim that we have set in the gear button here. So again, book button in order to get to wherever you want to go. Gear button will allow you to select the Parshanim. These 3 buttons over here will allow you to switch between views on the screen. And this button, which I always forget about, which isn't very important for our purposes right now, allows you to enlarge, or depending on how big you want it. Can everyone in the back tell me, are we okay now, or bigger? Bigger? You okay? Okay. Now, gear button allows us to select from a whole slew of Parshanim, including one of them here is Harei Chasim Levigai. Now, he's not checked right now. We're going to check him since we like him, especially for today. And right above him is Naftali Hertz Weisel. Now, when we started 4 weeks ago, this series, I didn't know that I was gonna be able to click a button and put Rabbi Naftali Hertz Weisel's Perush into our Mikrot Gedolot. That happened 2 weeks ago. Rabbi Naftali Hertz Weisel, we mentioned the Bei'ur last week. That was Moshe Mendelssohn and his team. Rabbi Naftali Hertz Weisel wrote the Perush on Vayikra, so where we're going to be looking at today, last Shabbat's parasha. So he wrote that Perush for the Bei'ur. That's always been somewhat available, but not available in a nice text version where you can cut and paste, where you can manipulate text, easy access to it on the pasuk. So you have to go get an old out-of-print version online. There were copies, and you fumble around to find the pages. Now it's all available on Sefer Vayikra, all on every single pasuk. In addition, he wrote a commentary on Bereshit, which most of it, over 2/3 of it, sat in manuscript for, like I said before, for a couple hundred years. It was finally published 2 years ago. And the person responsible for this, his name is Rav Moshe Tzuriel, who was a longtime mashgiach in Yeshivat Shalavim, as well as all sorts of other involved giving shirim and many other yeshivot. He's now 85 years old. He's unfortunately very ill, and we're going to add a tefillah that b'zchut all of the Torah that he's been marbitz, and especially b'zchut Perushim of Rav Naftali Herz Weisel, that he's the one who took that manuscript and worked on it until he produced this edition, and then generously gave it to Al Torah to spread to the rest of the world. So he should have Kadosh Baruch Hu should give him a lot of strength, and he should have a refuah shlema. And we're going to get to Rav Naftali Herz Weisel in a second. Okay, so we'll check him. We'll check him next. Okay, so here we have, so in this gear menu, one can check whichever parshanim one wants to display by default. But let's say we came to a pasuk like our pasuk, where there aren't so many parshanim. So now we already added a couple, but let's say we didn't have enough parshanim. So there's a button at the bottom of every pasuk. Zig, the Parshinot Savim, I just clicked on it. And we can even press Hakol, which you can either select any individual one of those parshanim, or we can select Hakol, and then it will have all of the parshanim open. So we can get a sense of if we want to Mikrot Ketzalot that has all 50 or 70 or whatever parshanim, along with their apparatuses and everything. So there's a lot of material, even on a pasuk, which is not the most largest pasuk. So there's quite a bit to learn, and we're gonna take a look at in depth at a couple of these a couple of the parshanim. Now pasuk up top here, lo yachlifenu, the lo yamiroto tov bira rabito, being hamer yamir behima bitema v'hayahu tzmurato yakolosh. Context is a person has a behima, which has been consecrated to be a sacrifice, to be a korban. The person is forbidden to exchange it. Lo yachlifenu. Now, what's strange though about this pasuk? What do we see? Lo yachlifenu.
The first is double language. The second it says lo yamir be'em hamer.
Lo yachlifenu, below yamirota is the first issue, exactly. What's the difference between, why do we have a doubling? Lo yachlifenu and lo yamirota. Are these two same thing, two different things? If they're different, what's the difference? If they're the same, why is it being repeated? Tov bira or rabito. Then ve'im hamer yamir behima b'hima. So if you violate that isur, then hu tzmurato yakodesh. So that's reasonably understandable. Then both what you substituted and the original animal, both of them become kodesh. So there's basically a penalty if you try to exchange something else for this animal that belonged to hekdesh, then it doesn't work, and both animals now become hekdesh. What we want to focus on is that beginning, lo yachlifenu v'lo yamirot. Now, you want to see that dot there? It's a very important dot. It's like 1847. So keep it in mind. Lo yachlifenu v'lo yamirot. Now here we have basically a difference between the two columns of Mefarshim. Now that doesn't exactly line up as far as a split between Rishonim and Achronim, but approximately. The right column, it depends on every given pasuk, of course, but the right column is mostly the earlier commentaries, which are the Rishonim, until let's say about 1500. The left column now will contain Achronim, modern commentaries starting from about 1500 on. This depends on which parshanim you said. Obviously, it doesn't have to be that way. But generally, if one puts them all on, so it's about 50%. The Achronim generally their commentaries are longer. We have more of the Rishonim commentaries, so it basically comes out to a balance. Most of the right side doesn't have much to say on the double. There is a Gemara, which is cited by a source called the Lekachton. Lekavto was a contemporary of Rashi, almost exactly the same time period as Rashi. And if we see in the Lekavto here, Lo Yachlifenu Bishel Achirim, Lo Yamiroto Bishelo. And then he cites Bavli, and then in parentheses, we have a source Bavli Tzmura Ted Amud Aleph. And if we click on that hyperlink, so we'll be able to see the Gemara. And in fact, the Lekavto is basically word for word what the Gemara says. Meaning that Lo Yachlifenu is that you can't substitute. If you have an animal that's affected, you can't take somebody else's animal to be a substitute for your animal. So even bishel atzmo, and you can't even take your own animal to be a substitute for this animal. So that's the way the Gemara in Tzimura, and the Bavli in Tzimura explains the doubling in the pasuk. And this is either accepted by the commentaries of the Rishonim or not really dealt with. That's pretty much until the first Parshan who does deal with this issue in a different way that I'm familiar with, at least, is Abarbanel. We'll get to him in a second. But fortunately, lined up right next to the Lekavto, just give me credit. We have Harechasim Leviga. And Harechasim Leviga is one of the first, and not the first, but one of the first to do serious work trying to figure out what Lo Yachlifenu is and what Lo Yamirenu, what the relationship is between Lo Yachlifenu and Lo Yamirenu. And this is something that is very, very characteristic of the Perush of Harechasim Leviga. He's always analyzing words, and not just words, but how words are used in different types of contexts. Because sometimes you can have the same word that will have multiple meanings depending on what word it comes with, what ota shimush it comes next to. So Harechasim Leviga says, Lo Yachlifenu, Stam Chalifa hu migarua limeshubach mimenu. As opposed to V'ahepech bitzmura shestama mimeshubach legarua. And suddenly he has a totally new perush that, as far as I know, nobody came up with before him. And he said that the difference between Lo Yachlifenu and Lo Yamiroto is that is in which quality direction is it going? So Lo Yachlifenu is going from worse to better, and Lo Yamiroto is going from better to worse.
Let's make it later in the pasuk when they said whether better for worse or worse for better.
Right, exactly. So then in the continuation of the pasuk,
But the second part only has one of them. Only has Amir and not Achlifenu.
so 1 second. So Lo Yachlifenu Lo Yamiroto, and then we have Tov B'Ra Ora B'Tov. And here in the second part, being Hamir Yamir Behima Behima, it doesn't talk about either Tov or Ra. Right?
It's only Amir, not Achlifenu.
Only has some. Okay, that's a separate.
That's an improvement, not a degradation.
It's hard to know from the second half of the pasuk whether Hamir Yamir Behima Behima is in accordance with Rashi. According to
Hasim, it's only being applied when you improve it, not when you degrade it.
Is that necessary? It's one has to argue that?
We'll talk at the table.
Okay. Fair enough. I'm not sure. I'm not sure he addresses that explicitly, but okay. It's in that case, it's not that. That's not critical for us right now. But we're going to get to that. We're going to get to the next part of the pasuk. We'll talk about Rabbi Sof in a second. So Harechasim Leviga says that that's his take on Lo Yachlifenu, which is of course a pshat, which does not go like the Bavli. And then he brings proof texts, he brings examples which support his thesis. So, for example, we can click on each of these, of course, to see the pasuk. See the pasuk inside. Levenim nafalu legazit nivneh, shikmin gudau barazim nachliv. So the point here in this pasuk is that the people are saying that even if something gets destroyed, we'll build something that's even better. So that's case proof text number one. Shikmim heim hagruim ba'ivanot, va'arazim ha'meshubachim. So if the shikmim are chopped down, arazim nachlif will switch them with cedar trees. V'koyei Hashem yachalifu choach. So the people who trust in Hashem, believe in Hashem, they will renew their energies. Something that was best for something that's even more and better. Skipping down to an example, a pasuk that we're perhaps more familiar with, Vayigalach, Vayichalek Simotar. When Yosef comes in front of Paro, he changes his clothing. Now, there is clearly he's going from the clothing of a prisoner to the clothing which is to a change of clothing, which is really to approach the king in them. So presumably an upgrade of his apparel. Similarly, the Hefech B'Tzmura. So he brings a few examples. For example, by Yamiru et Kvodam in the pasuk in Tehillim, which is talking about by Feta Egel. By Yamiru et Kvodam b'Tavnit Shor Ochel Esed. Right after by Yishlachavum Yasuega b'Chorei Yishlachavum Masicha. By Yamiru et Kvodam. So we have a Kadosh Baruch Hu is the kavod of Bnei Yisrael, and they switched him for a shor Ochel Esed for an egel. So that's obviously a downgrade.
So Tov Bara and his interpretation is good from bad, not good with bad. So originally when I always understood Tov Bara, I thought it meant
Or
Right. So you're taking instead of Tov, you're substituting for it bad. So you're being
Vayichalek is the other way, right?
right. So we have both Tov Bara or Rabbi Tov.
But it's not parallel, is what I'm saying.
Okay. So the question's gonna be how we read this pasuk, and so then at the end he explains the atah mifaresh ha'acharon tzchila hidarko. So we know that sometimes in Tanakh we have what's called an ABBA structure, or sometimes one of the forms it can sometimes take is an infusio. Where we instead of the first being followed by the second, and then another first followed by the second, the middle parts go together. So in this case, what Harach Hasim Bigas suggests is our pasuk is lo yachlifenu, the lo yamiroto tov bira. Those go together, and then o rabitov goes back to the first part of the pasuk. So ABBA structure. There's times in Tanakh where there's an AB structure, sometimes where there's ABBA. We have plenty of examples, and Harach Hasim Bigas in earlier parts of his commentary has provided many examples of this phenomenon. So that's Harach Hasim Bigas reading of the pasuk. And at the very tail end, the yesh shenichak l'imsobo hebzel acher l'lotzo. There's this cryptic allusion here. There's some person, he says, who found a different distinction, and there's no need for that person's theory, or he obviously didn't think very highly of it. What's going on? Who's this referring to? So this is actually referring to Rabbi Naftali Herzweisel. The Pirush that, if we shut it up, we'll see it right here. The Pirush that was written as part of the Beyur. Harach Hasim Bigas, there's a lot of politics going on. There's certain. I'm not saying that it's all political, and there isn't a good solid exegetical factors going on as well. But there was certainly differences in between more right-wing circles, more left-wing circles. Harach Hasim Bigas belonged to a more right-wing circle. Rabbi Naftali Herzweisel in Mendelssohn's circle was more left-wing, a more open branch of orthodoxy. Everyone here is Orthodox Shomer Mitzvos, Torah abiding Jews. But there were differences in orientation. And as a result, Rabbi Chasim Lubiga had a somewhat dim or very critical opinion of Mendelssohn's Beyur and his whole team. And so much so that he doesn't even always refer to them by name. But he'll sort of give one of these digs. That if there was somebody who gave an alternative explanation, there's no need for it. If we take a look, which we couldn't have done 2 weeks ago when we started this series, but now that we have Rabbi Naftali's Weisel, so we now know who Rabbi Chasim Lubiga is referring to. And he gives a third interpretation here. Not like the Gemara, which said there was a difference between yourself and somebody else's objects. Not like Rabbi Chasim Lubiga who came later, who said that there's a difference between if you're improving or making something worse. But he says, Lafi Hapshat, which is of course a clue-in that he's going against the Gemara. He's not going against Rabbi Chasim Lubiga because Rabbi Chasim Lubiga isn't around him. This is so. Notorious Weisel is writing in 1783 approximately, and Rabbi Chasim Lubiga is published 1815. So Lafi Hapshat, but so this is as opposed to the Gemara and Tzumura. Chalifin al davar acher shenitain chelef ha'oleh mamon o klei chesed v'zahav v'kodesh. אף על פי שחליפתו שווה יותר ממנו. ולא ימיר הוא שנותן דבר זה עצמו תמורתו. בקר בבקר, עז בעז או כסף בכסף. What's the differentiation that Rabbi Naftali Weisel suggests? So he says the difference is between lo yachlifenu and lo yamir. So is if we're talking about min b'mino or min shelo b'mino. It's like halachic terminology. If somebody is substituting something of the same type, in the same category, bakar ez ve'ez, that's temura. If you're being machlid, then you're substituting klei chesed or zahav of the value of the object, you're giving that to the kodesh instead of the animal. You're just substituting something of a totally different nature. So that's Rabbi Naftali Weisel's suggestion, and Rabbi Chasim Lubiga is reacting to that. He doesn't even tell us why he doesn't like it. But I think we could do our own research to uncover some of this, and the way we would do that, of course, is by clicking on the words Lo Yachlifenu. Click on touch screens and down here. Okay, that doesn't work. We're gonna have to refresh the screen. What happens if I touch the touch screen and no longer responds? In case it's a touch device and it no longer responds. Okay, so now we'll click on Yachlifenu, and the concordance will come up. And if we take a look at the different psukim, so we'll see that many of the psukim fit Rabbi Chasim Lubiga's approach, not all the psukim fit Rabbi Naftali Weisel's approach. So, for example, in the very first pasuk, so according to Rabbi Naftali, I'm not sure I can make it. I'm not going to play around with making words. It's not that critical. By Galach by Echalek Simotat. So according to
doesn't mean he gave you a raise.
So by or what should take by Galach by Echalek Simotat. He switched clothing. So that's clothing for clothing. It's not clothing for money. It's not clothing for an animal. And so so many of these psukim, most of the psukim, in fact, Rabbi Naftali Weisel's approach will have difficulty with.
What does the Chasim Lubiga do with its identical value? Because he only talks about up or down, right?
Yes, so it's possible. Maybe this is what this relates to what my father was suggesting before. That maybe the last part of the pasuk might be able to deal with that. The last part of the pasuk might be behema b'hema. If you have equivalence, if you have an equivalency. But I don't know. He doesn't. As far as I remember, he doesn't discuss. In general, it's very hard to find a case where something will be, where animals will be exactly the same as each other. That might be, so he might say that it just doesn't. It's not very common, not common. And if it was exactly the same, then why would the person be doing it? Right? It wouldn't make sense. The person would be substituting for exact same quality level.
One substitution, like if you thought you lost it, and then it turns out you didn't lose it.
Okay, that's an interesting. Yeah, that could be an interesting case. Good call. So, okay, so. So in these two parshanim, they're working with the biblical text. They're working with other examples in the case of in Tanakh, particularly in the case of Harachasim Ubiga, who almost always sources extensively, brings all sorts of psukim to support his approach. But they're giving, so it basically is, yes, it's their own approach. In the case of Rabbi Naftali Hertz Weisel, so if we go down to a Barbanel, all the way at the bottom, I have to open up a little bit. If we have Segma Pershino Save, and we open up a Barbanel, so we'll see, when we've made there, שהחילוק הוא הדבר שאינו מימינו, והצורה הוא מימינו. Barbanel's Perush might have been known to Rabbi Naftali Hertz Weisel. He definitely had no Barbanel, and it could be that's where he got it from, either the Yodin or the Lo Yodin. And so that's the first time. That's really the first one of the Barbanel is basically on the border between Rishonim and Achronim, and there we have for the first time that distinction. Harachasim Ubiga's distinction, though, as far as I know, that's his own creative question. Now, moving back to Shadal for a second, Lo Yachlifenu v'lo Yamiroto, over here, Zed Derech Klal, Yachar Kach Pereish HaPratim Shelo Yamiroto Lo Tov B'Ra v'lo Rabito. Ubedat Bal HaTe'amim Mireh, Hi HaTzmura Hi Tov B'Ra, Hachluf Rabitov. Shadal now says, according to the Tamei Hamikra, which we'll go back to in a second, so we have this much in. The Tzmura is Tov Bira, is going down in value. Chiluf is Rabitov, is an improvement. The Ishla says Siyuim, and then look what he does. He quotes the same exact psukim as we saw in Harachasim Ubiga. Arazim Shikmin Udao, Arazim Nachli. The Koyei Hashem Yachlifu Chalach. Vayamiru et, those were the Hachlafa, or Lo Yachlifenu. And then Vayamiru et Klodam Mitzavni Shor as an example for Lo Yamiroto, where there is a downgrade from Hashem to the ego.
What's the shame? What is the term that's used when you're machli? For Meister Shame, you want to take it to Yerushalayim, you have to prove it.
If you're talking about so it's Sartah HaKesef B'Yadecha. There it's neither. No, because there you're redeeming. Yeah, it's not. There's no halacha or halacha.
If you follow this interpretation, why does it have to do it twice? It's quite clearly there was one way, it's the other way. Then he goes Tov without Tov. That's already said it. Why do you have to say it again?
Right. So that's a very good question. Part of this probably the simplest explanation for that is that the Torah never made it quite explicit. We only know from all the other contexts together with this, that it would be that way. Or it could be one could say that that the Torah is then just giving additional explanation, even though it's true that from the words Lo Yachlifenu v'lo Yamiroto, and it's stressing. Regardless of in which direction you're going, you might have thought that going from that Lo Yachlifenu should be fine, but no, it's either which way. This is part of the issue that I think it's worth noting that one of the most important, one of the most fundamental issues in all Parshanut is whether there are synonyms and whether there is duplication for purely literary reasons, or whether anytime there's a doubling, there has to be additional content. For many of the Rishonim, we saw some examples of this in previous weeks. For many of the Rishonim, there can be duplication for literary reasons. For Rashbam and his school, Ramban and his school. In the period of the Achronim, by the time we get to Mendelssohn's Beyur, Harechasim Uviga, Rav Hirsch, Malbim, all of these Perushim, they take a much more aggressive approach on the side that somewhat harking back to Chazal, where we see this very, very often in Chazal, where every single word has to have a nuance in meaning, has to teach us a new halacha. Otherwise, there would be no reason. Otherwise, it would be redundant. So in this case, so part of what's underlying this whole effort is that basically from the end of the 18th century through the 19th, and I think we see it today also in many circles, the need for every word to have its own special meanings. That's what we're seeing in You could ask the same question then, when it comes to which is what you just asked. Well, why then is there a need for Tov Ra and Rabbi Tov? And the answer again could be that it's just for literary reasons. The answer could be that it's defining those words, and that's where the pasuk itself is really supporting our Hasidut with that. So those could be a couple different approaches. So back to Shadal. So Shadal brings these psukim, and it looks like he's a copy of Harechasim Uviga. We know, I already sang Shadal's praises, that he's the one who's always citing his sources. So what's going on here? So why doesn't Shadal quote Harechasim Uviga? Right?
I wrote it earlier.
So if we go back to the manuscripts here in Shadal, we know that Shadal, even though the Pirush was published posthumously, and even though Harechasim Uviga was published in 1847, Hamish Hadel of Shadal was published in 1847. We said that was going to be important before he had, right after he got a copy of Harechasim Uviga. But the basis for Shadal's Pirushim exists in notebooks that we have dated from the 1830s and early 1840s, before he had a copy of Harechasim Uviga. And Shadal isn't even presenting this as his own. He's saying, which we're going to get to in a second. So he's saying, according to Ta'amei HaMikra, this is the Perush that comes out of it. Clearly, and we know this from the manuscript evidence, he didn't have Harechasim Uviga when he's writing this Perush. To give an example, though, of somebody who does have Harechasim Uviga, so if we go to show additional commentaries at the bottom there. So Haktav v'Hakabbalah, who's a slightly later contemporary. And so Bo Yachifenu, Stam Chalifa, Humi Garua Li Meshubach Mimenu, Kamo Shikmin Gudel Barazim Achli. Right, we see the same exact Pirush again. But here, scroll down. We'll say, Ra'iti Misha Nichak, Limso Hazel Acher Ben Chalifin Litzmar Ben Sorech. Right, so those words should sound exactly familiar. This is a total citation. And then we have in parentheses, Reish Lamed Shin. Who's Reish Lamed Shin? Rabbi Leib Shapira. So he's quoting, so Haktav HaKabbalah is quoting a source. That's Harechasim Uviga. That's the author of Harechasim Uviga. So Haktav HaKabbalah is giving us a whole citation. Harechasim Uviga had a very, very significant influence on the Parshanim that came after him. Shadal quotes him in a number of places. We saw in Hamish Shadel before, where a whole page comes from Harechasim Uviga. Haktav HaKabbalah quotes him, and Harechasim Uviga was the great uncle of Rav Hirsch. So Rav Hirsch is influenced by Harechasim Uviga. In fact, Rav Hirsch feels a need to clarify that he's writing his own Perush and it's not lifted from Harechasim Uviga. So apparently there were people who thought that Harechasim Uviga had a very significant influence on Rav Hirsch. And so Harechasim Uviga has a very important influence on basically all the important Parshanim that we know from the 19th century. But as sometimes it gets lost, and just like Shadal tried to bring at least a page of it back into public domain. And so Baruch Hashem, we now have the ability to access the entire Perush, or virtually within a couple of weeks, hopefully the entire Perush of Harech Hasim we got. And as we can see, there are tremendously creative insights and the ability to unshackle oneself from the assumptions that one grows up with, either from learning the Gemara, learning Rashi. That's something that's one of the hallmarks of Harech Hasim we got, and he does it systematically throughout Torah. And there's always food for thought.
It's interesting that Rabbi Hirsch was quite more open than a single Bika, right? Even though they're.
I think they both would actually probably be in the more right wing. Rabbi Hirsch compared to even though Rabbi Hirsch has one nice to say about the Beor and Mendelssohn, Rabbi Hirsch was certainly more right, significantly more to the right. So now everyone is always, everyone always needs somebody who's going to be to the left of them, so that they can have somebody that they can criticize and that they can pretend is the coach. That way, that makes that way their coach. So everyone is on the spectrum until you have to get to really very, very far to have nobody on your left or right. But basically, Rabbi Hirsch and Harech Hasim are more or less in the same general part.
Like, for example, I mean, wasn't Robert Hirsch like the one who like had the kind of an NCSY type of or was that some man I'm confusing with somebody else? One of the German scholars had they had a thing for boys and girls at a young,
I think you may be referring to some of the Shuvot of 3H, which are sometimes cited in some. I don't know. I'm not.
I think he was criticized a lot for that. But he felt it was like to go against the reform. He had to.
It could be. Certainly, Rav Hirsch wouldn't be viewed as a left winger. He wouldn't be categorized in the same camp as the Beor and
quite a bit more open than.
Somewhat of a model of Torah and Zeracharetz.
Right.
There's certainly some sort of secular studies going on, but it's a complicated spectrum, and not everybody is always in the same. With the right and left depends on the issue sometimes. So in any case, Harech Hasim Bika in the 19th century Parshanut has a very, very significant impact, lost in the 20th century and hopefully restored in the 21st century. Now let's go back for a second though to the pasuk itself, because Harech Shadal is talking about the Tamei Mikra. Harech Hasim Bika is probably appealing to them as well. And here we have something very interesting. So in the dot. Now, how we parse the book is we said we could have different possibilities. You could say Lo Yafifenu Lo Yamiroto, and Lo Yafifenu is Tov B'Ra, Lo Yamiroto is Rabito. Alternatively, we could say Lo Yafifenu, and then Lo Yamiroto Tov B'Ra, and then Rabito goes back to Lo Yafifenu. But those are the basic two possibilities, and then we could have additional possibilities. We could have Lo Yafifenu Lo Yamiroto, and those would have nothing to do with Tov B'Ra or Rabito. And then in addition to Lo Yafifenu Lo Yamiroto, they're both applied to Tov B'Ra or Rabito, right? According to Rabbi Naftali Herzweisel, who said that Lo Yafifenu and Lo Yamiroto are talking about whether it's Min B'Mino, Min Shalom B'Mino. Both Min B'Mino and Min Shalom B'Mino can both be Tov B'Ra or Rabito. So then you could have A, B, and then the next two things go on both A and B. You have all sorts of possibilities. Part of this, though, is going to depend on how the musical notations, the Tamei Mikra, how they parse the pasuk. And here we have another part to this question, has to do with also the authority of Tamei Mikra. Now, there's differences of opinion in the Rishonim, whether Tamei Mikra come in the most extreme position from Har Sinai, or whether they're even as late as the Balei Amisoram. So we have a range of opinions on that. And assuming that if there were the most So then, yeah, it's hard to argue with Moshe, you know? But if they're anything, but that's a minority position. If they're anything later than that, then the question is, how authoritative are they? And we know that throughout the generations, basically almost all Parshanim adopted the position that one could disagree with Tamei HaMikra, even though Tamei HaMikra are a guide. But Rashi, Rashbam, Ramban, pretty much all of the Parshanim, there are plenty of cases in which they offer suggestions, interpretations which don't follow Tamei HaMikra. Now, what would the Tamei HaMikra say here? How would we parse the words? How would we split the words? Where would we put the commas according to the Tamei HaMikra? Now, this, so the first thing we have is Lo Yamiroto, we have a Tavir. Tavir is a Misharei, so under the, it's a little hard to see on the screen, but under the top, that's Tavir. Tavir is a Misharei, is what comes, what serves the time of a Tiktaka, here, the Tov Birah. So Lo Yamiroto, Tov Birah, those words go together. But now, the relationship between that section, Lo Yamiroto Tov Birah, and what came before it, Lo Yachmifenu and Rabbi Tov, that's a little less. Lo Yachmifenu has one dot, a Rabbi. Yeah, anyone want to check me on that in your Chumash? Her Kazayim, Vayikra Kazayim plus Yud. What do you say? Lo Yachmifenu? What's on top of the Fei? What do you have? Two dots. That's Zakev Katon. What's going on here? Here we have a Rabbi in Koren. Every edition of Koren that's ever been published, as far as I know, has Zakev Katon. Maybe someday they'll correct it. But
You said one dot. Where's the one dot? Just
one that's above the figure.
What source?
Yeah,
What's good question? So what's the source for? What's the source for this?
Yeah.
And what's the source for Koren? We have to ask both. We have to ask the question on both sides. So yesterday there was a very big sale that went on at Sotheby's. Everyone heard about it. The news has been reporting on it for a couple of months already. The Codex Sasson. So what is Codex Sasson? So the Codex Sasson is one of the oldest copies of Tanakh that we have. Unfortunately, it's not complete. It's going to be important in a second. But we have lots of, not lots of, lots is relative. We have a whole bunch of different of manuscripts that are early manuscripts. Codex Sasson is one of them. And it sold yesterday for, depending if you count the tax, something like over $40 million at the auction. And Codex Sasson would be an example of an ancient manuscript that one would go check to see what it has, because the ancient manuscripts are not like a Sefer Torah. They're manuscripts which have a Masoretic apparatus. They'll have Tamei, they'll have Nikud and Tamei. And one of the most important, generally considered the most important manuscript, is known as the Keter. Most of the most important manuscripts were written by the Ben Asher family in Tiberia, the 9th, 10th centuries. And the Keter, the Aleppo Codex, which is the manuscript that the Rambam had, and the Rambam basically swears by, in quotes. And so the Keter would be the source that we would go to for the most authoritative manuscript. Unfortunately, though, the Keter is missing almost all of Torah. Where that went, so it's unclear. It either got burnt in 1947 when there was a mob in Syria which destroyed the shul, or it got taken by somebody. So that's we still don't have the answer to that question. So we don't have the Keter here. We can't check the Keter. We can check though the oldest dated codex, which is not the Sasson Codex, but the Leningrad Codex. Yeah. And here we have the Leningrad Codex on this pasuk. And what do we see? Well, we actually Fenu on top of the Pei, single dot, one dot. So like the text that we have, and there's a good reason for that. The text that we have on our Torah is based on the Leningrad, it's based on the Ketzer, where we have the Ketzer, and it's generally based on the Leningrad Codex when all we have is the Leningrad Codex, we don't have the Ketzer. The Leningrad Codex is very, very close to the Ketzer from the same family. Now, if we go to the Sasson, you don't have to pay $40 million for this. You can actually press a couple buttons on your computer and you can get a copy of the Sasson Codex. And here we'll see Lo, we'll say the Lo Yamiroto, and we'll make that out. So this went for $40 million, even though there's all sorts of pages in this codex which have worn away, or parts of the margins of them have basically haven't survived. Here's the end. You can see the ends of the parchment. And so this page, like many others, pages like this in Torah in the codex, and nevertheless 40 million. So just imagine what it would have been if it were in pristine condition. So here's our pasuk. Lo, when see around, we'll make it out. It's a little. I'm going to try to enlarge it. It's not going to help so much, though. Here to orient ourselves, what we have Miroto, and here is the Lo. Yud, Chet, Lamed. Don't have it. So Sasson Codex isn't going to help us, despite its recent vein. But there's a whole bunch of other Ben Asher manuscripts, and they all have one dot, a Rabbi on top of the bit. Where does Koren? I'm sorry. Well, forget it. Give me a second. Building up a little. And so why does Koren have a Zakei Katon? Why does Koren have two dots? So there's a simple answer to that and a more complicated answer. The simple answer is that Koren, when its text came out, was before there was access to the Keter. It was before the Ketzer was brought to Israel, and Koren relied on, and the more complicated part of the answer is that Koren, even though there was a team of scholars serious scholars that were involved in it, they relied less on manuscripts and mostly on a printed edition, which was published by Heidenheim. And mistakes or choices made by Heidenheim invariably winds up manifesting in the Koren text, including many obvious errors. Over the years, Koren has corrected some of them, but there's that original choice will impact unless they totally revise their whole Tanakh. And in this case, the Heidenheim Chumash had two dots, has Zakei Katon. Why does the Chumash have it? Heidenheim wasn't somebody, wasn't an illiterate person by any stretch of the imagination. We're talking about a major towering figure. So there are a group of manuscripts, generally the Sfaradi manuscripts, which are considered to be of lower quality than the Tiberian, than the Ben Asher manuscripts. And we'll see an example of one of them. We'll see the Paris 25 manuscript, along with several others. If we look at the word Lo Yachli, make out on top of the Fei two dots. Yeah, it's a little hard to do with the screen and everything, but it's coming out a little faded. But square with two dots above the Fei. Similarly with other manuscripts, with other European manuscripts, they had the Zakei Katon. Heidenheim was following them. Koren was following Heidenheim, somewhat blindly in many cases, and that's how we wind up with Rav Mordechai Breuer and more accurate versions, including the version on our Torah, which is based on the Leningrad and Ben Asher manuscripts, and being one way, and Koren in many cases, or hundreds of cases like this, having different timings. Sometimes there's even differences in. Now, why do we care? What difference does it make whether it's a Rabbi or a Zakei Katon? So it's possible that in this case, one could argue maybe that it's not that critical, But I think that one can certainly make a case that even that in this case, it's part of the whole discussion. The Zakef Katon is a stronger break than a Revi'i. It's questionable to what degree, where the Revi'i exactly lies, but generally we assume that there are 4 levels of melachim, 4 levels of ta'amim, of cancellations that create a pause. The highest level is the level of the et nachta and the sof pasuk. Then the second level is the most important, the biggest break there is a zakef katon. There are a few other tamim that are part of it. Tzipcha is also part of that, but zakef katon. So basically, if you're dividing the pasuk in half, so it gets divided in half at the et nachta. That's the biggest break in the pasuk, and then the sof pasuk is the same level at the end of the verse. A zakef katon basically quarters a pasuk. So if the first part until that nachta will frequently, not in every pasuk, but frequently be divided by a zakef katon, then you'll have 2 parts of the first half, and then another 2 parts also frequently with zakef katon in the second. Like in our pasuk, according to Korah, in our pasuk we have an et nachta on bito. Then the second half of the pasuk, being hamer to yakodesh, is divided by etliv hema. On top of the mem there is zakef katon. So that quarters the pasuk. So the last 2 sections are be'im hamer yamer behima, be'im hamer yamer behima b'hema, the hayahutz marto yakodesh. Right, a very natural break of the pasuk. What about the first part of the pasuk? According to Koren's division, lo yaflipenu stands on its own. Is a zakef katon. It's a very strong break. So lo yaflipenu would be separate then below yamiroto tov bera or rabito. If it's a Revi'i, it becomes a little more questionable, maybe even a lot more questionable, as to whether the Revi'i is part of, can go together with Lo Yaflipenu, Lo Yamiroto, and they would both be modified by Tov Bera or Rabito. The person who discusses some of this is Shadal. Shadal, in fact, in this case, it's a variation he has at the last line here. Ela lefi kabanato kahaya ra'ui lahatim. Shadal says that really it should have worked, the tamim should have worked differently, according to this Grush of Harachasim Modigat. It should have had lo yaflipenu below yamiroto with, on top of that top there, there's 2 dots with the zakef katon. Now that nobody has, neither Koren nor none of the manuscripts support that reading. But Shadal will frequently, as if one reads Shadal consistently, one will see that all the time he's discussing how the tamim could have been or should have been according to the different perushim. So he says that the better way the tamim would have been set up according to this perush should have been lo yaflipenu lo yamirota. That would be 1 unit, and then those are each one then fits with the second part of the unit. So that should have been where the zakef katon would have.
So he's disagreeing with the Masoretes.
Shadal is saying that this perush would disagree. Would disagree with. Sure. Depending on this, that will affect on how you understand what the word lo yaflipenu and what lo yamiroto is. Are they being defined by Tov Bera Rabito? Are they something totally separate? Right? We saw 3 different interpretations before. Now, part of that depends on how you parse the verse. All these little small things, they all add up to much bigger questions. The bigger questions, what the halacha is, will depend on what the meaning of each word is. The meaning of each word will depend on the semantic relationship between the words in the verse. That will be governed by, in turn, the cancellations, by the tamim, or depending if one's willing to disagree with the tamim, what authority one gives to the tamim. Like I said before, not everyone agrees as to whether they're Moshe Sinai, what kind of authority they have. Most of the Rishonim probably believe that they were of lesser authority and that one could disagree with the tamim. Nevertheless, even those who disagree with the tamim view them with great respect and view them as a beacon, though not necessarily something that has to be followed blindly. Right. The question is whether it's an authoritative punctuation that one can't disagree with, or whether it's a punctuation that's a guide. And in some cases, we could suggest an alternative.
It's a question of whether we're looking for state or we're looking for meaning.
Well, we'd like both.
That's the question.
Yeah.
So I was gonna say, you keep working to see that somewhere along the line, if you've got one with the two and one with the one.
Like, there's large parts of the Torah that come with Moshe Sinai. It doesn't mean that there aren't machlokot about it. Transmission wasn't always so perfect. But yeah, that's the question is going to be what causes the machloket. You could formulate it that way. Is what's caused the machloket because transmission broke down, or is what causes machloket because different people created different systems? Okay, so this is a little longer. I think our whole session, unfortunately. So this is an example though, where we have new Parshanim, all sorts of new Parshanim that are slowly and somewhat quick, and the pace is quickened as the years have gone by, which have now become available, and they will continue to transform our ability to study. The accuracy of our editions. We have access to manuscripts today that, with a click of a button, what we were able to just take a look at right now in the Leningrad Codex and the Paris Sectaviad and the Susum, which wasn't so helpful in this case, but in other cases it would be helpful. This is access that has only come about over the last 10 years. It means that we can study things, that we can examine things, we can produce accurate texts of the Rishonim, annotated texts of the Rishonim, which sometimes differ significantly from the printed editions, which was much more difficult, and in some cases impossible even in 10 years ago, certainly 30 years ago. So these are two areas in which the rapid progress is being. A third area, which is going to be homework, I guess, is a tool which we're going to look at very quickly for a minute or two. And that tool is accessible from the sandwich menu under Tanakh. And we'll see one of the choices there is Mabadat HaTanakh. It's called the Tanakh layer. We're going to open that. And if you're opening it from the Mikro Kedolah, it will actually go directly to the perek that you were on. So we have two choices here in Mabadat HaTanakh. We have Nituach text and we have Hashva'at Pnei text. We're going to look quickly at each, 1 minute for each. Nituach text we're going to set Vayikra, and we're going to go to Perek Kavav. It calls up the Perek, and it gives us a table. On the left side, the table gives us all the words, or if you want, you can switch the radio buttons there from milim to zugot, which will give us pairs of words, and shlishiyot, triplets. So under milim, though, what it will do for each word, every single word that appears in this unit, it will tell us how many times it appears in our unit. It will tell us relative to the rest of the book how much more common it is in our unit. Or it will tell us the same thing relative to Tanakh. Now, the reason why there's some of those lines, that happens in a case where the word appears only in this unit and no place else in Tanakh. And that's, of course, going to be very valuable information. Because, for example, we have a word like, everyone see the root here? Keri. This is from the staff Shabbat Parasha, being Telachui Mid Bekeri. So that word appears only here and no place else in the rest of Tanakh. And if one wants to see all of the occurrences of the word, someone just clicks on the little icon next to the word, and there one will have all the different verses. If one clicks on the word or checks that box, so then on the right side in the text, we can show down a little. It will highlight all the words for you, all the occurrences in the text itself. If you were to hover over Peri, it would tell you Shem Etzem, and it appears 7 times. If it appeared in the rest of Tanakh, let's just take a different word. Let's take the word Dever. So Dever, Shem Etzem will appear once. So let's say now we're going to click on Dever. So it will tell us Dever, there's one occurrence in the Ketach. Ein Mofa'in Nosafim B'Sefer. Shachiach pi 11 mibatanach kulo. It's 11 times more common here than in the rest of Tanakh. We click on any of those lines, so it will give us all the occurrences in Tanakh. It will give us the statistics. I'm giving with a very quick. I'm already past my 1 minute for this overview. You can imagine this is only a fraction of what one can do, the kind of analysis one can do. What this allows, what's the value here? So what this allows one to do is to see which words are the dominant literary words in the unit. So in this case, Terry, which comes up at the top of the list, is a very significant word in this unit. It's a very important for understanding what the Torah is all about. The meaning is of walking with Hashem B'Terry. So this is something that repeats over and over again. Now, one might notice that on one's own as one's reading the psukim. This will give you the hard data to understand how significant the word is. The meaning, of course, one still needs the Parshanim and one's own thoughts to do. So this is just one last button here. Over here, we have a Torah icon. We're going to click on it. And what that will produce for us is a list of comparing this perek to all of the other prakim in Tanakh to find out which prakim are most similar to this perek, which prakim it's related to.
Most similar in what sense?
In literary sense, as far as words and phrases that will come up in both. And then when you click on any one of these, and it will then show both prakim side by side, highlighting the words and phrases which are similar in each. In this case, this is going to be for homework. One of the results that comes up is Vayikra Kapeh and Vayikra Kavav. So Vayikra Kapeh was number 7. You went to Vayikra Kapeh, Vayikra Kavav would be number 4. Now it's all, the algorithm is a little complicated. It's not always producing the best results. It needs to be, you need to analyze them yourself. Sometimes there's false positives, sometimes there's false negatives. But this past week, we read a double parasha. We read the Har and the Chukotai together. Some years, they're separate. Most people think of them as separate parashiyot. If one looks at some of the literary connections between Perek Kapeh and Perek Kavav, one will see that these prakim are very, very closely related. And it's possible, according to some of the Mefarshim, and if one goes to the topical analysis part of the site, there's topics which deal with it. According to some of the Mefarshim, particularly Rashbam, there's the Tochacha, even though we think of the Tochacha, Brachot, and Kavod as being on the entire Torah, but there's a major focus in the Tochacha on Shemitah and Yovel. And the Tochacha, according to Rashbam, is basically Brachot and Kavod that will be dependent on whether one observes Shemitah in particular. And that's why if we remember in the middle of the Tochacha, suddenly the pasuk says, let's go down and just see it here. As tirtzeh haaretz et shabbatotah, kol yemei hashama v'yatzem be'eretz oyivechem. As tishvat haaretz v'yatzem b'shabbatotah, kol yemei hashama tishvot, et asher lo shabbatah b'shabbatotechem b'shitechem aleha. The pasuk that really takes on the most central significance in the Torah is we're dealing with the lack of observance, Shemitah. So this is something that through the literary analysis that would support this type of idea. And so there's all sorts of possibilities one has. One can, if one has one's own two texts, so one can go to the another instance. So one can choose Hashvat Shnei Textim. So you can put in whichever two texts you want to compare. Let's say in this case, just for a second example. So automatically it gives an example that starts at Dibrot in Shmot and in Dvarim. And then you could readily see what are the differences between them. All the parallels are highlighted. Everything that's not highlighted is a difference between Shmot and Dvarim. You could compare Prakim in Shmuel and Lachim on one hand, and Divrei Yamim on the other hand, and it would highlight for you all the parallels, and then be able to see all the differences. Right, so these are tools. This is exactly, so why are we looking at this? So first of all, I want everyone to be aware of to be able to use it. And there's guides that give more detailed information on all the different settings that one can use. One can do even much more complex things than we saw just now. But this is an example of where without technology, doing this on paper would be very, very difficult. This is something that we need computers for, all the calculations that get involved. And this is another area, both the literary analysis part of it, which is a discipline which is become very, very popular over the last 50 years or so. And the technological side, which can now ensure that the literary analysis is being done rigorously, and one can sort of check. Right, some of you can make up all sorts of things. Oh, I found a parallel here, a parallel there. Is that parallel significant? Is it not significant? It all depends on the hard data. So this is the type of tool that I think will contribute significantly to the development of literary analysis, and already is. Basically, anybody who does literary analysis uses the Tanakh already, and I think it will become an even more important tool as the years go. What I started by saying is that we can all contribute here, and there are so many additions that we have lists and lists of additions that we want to make. We have the raw materials in many cases to make them. The limiting factor is time. The limiting factor is finding people who want to help us, volunteers. There are about a dozen volunteers throughout the world that are helping all sorts of projects in Al Torah. Some of them are doing amazing things. They're helping with creating translations of works that we never had before. They're creating editions of works that were never available before. If anyone here wants to be a part of Al Torah, anyone here wants to help, easy to contact us. Support in the sandwich menu there. Yeah, my email is simply Novetsky@alatorah.org. Under Odot here, there's Kesher. So clicking on that email will get to me as well. Anybody who wants to be a part of this, everything we do winds up helping a tremendous amount of people all over the world, people to access it, everything almost instantaneously can go up on the site. It's a tremendous opportunity, tremendous privilege, that generation that we live in, times that we live in, that we have this ability to impact Torah study worldwide. Be a part of it.
Go ahead. Yeah, this card. I have it.
No, all virtual. Alatorah.org.
How are you? I don't understand how you get away. If it says you can't do it smooth, something is better now. Thank you very much. An amazing organization. What is it? Whatever. Right, you know, and I said, oh, that's how I'm going. I found it.
Do you know Marie Hirsch? Who? Marie Hirsch. Lives close to him. But he started. But he has a cover.
Yeah, my problem is my scooter. Remember my house is inside, way outside.
And he starts to
It's not hard as much.
Obviously, oh, right, you can't consume it.
This is by 2,000 meters.
If I know. So maybe get some creative to make on that.
Maybe there's a. They're not, they don't really follow things. We don't get that. I do have, which I would like. That's all right. Yeah, but it's really that hard. As far as the one, oh.
Right.
That should be so.
Exactly. It's between midnight and.
Exactly. It's funny, that's the camera here, you play back.
I'm sorry,
Coming back again, or is
this is the last session,
It's very interesting that in the Pasuk where Yosef was sent down by Yaakov, to look for his brother, and supposedly inexplicably to explain to make sure that they know how to.
Bye, have a good day.
We will take care of that. The 10 sheep, yeah, go down and check and see if your brothers know how to do 10 sheep. Well, that's a little strange. But in any case, when he said Ha'ish, he meets Ha'ish there. Rashi says is the Malach Gabriel. That Gabriel and he's there to tell him that watch out, they're gonna kill him. Where did Rashi get that?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Because all he said, and Rashi says it on where it says, Yatsumi said. Because I said, at times that they're gonna try to kill you, and where's the green? I haven't thought that. So it says, it doesn't, there either.